expect? The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing with testimony from Twitter and Facebook, it'll get underway tomorrow. They won't be broken up tomorrow, but there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill who'd like to see that. Others would like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act just to be repealed. Let's talk about all of this with Sally Hubbard. She is the Open Markets Institute Director of Enforcement Strategy and also the author of Monopolies Suck. Sally, it's good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you expect tomorrow? Is it going to be, I always think of Mel Brooks in Blazing Saddles. Gentlemen, we have to save our phony baloney jobs. That's what a hearing is like on Capitol Hill, having suffered through many of them. Are we going to get that tomorrow?
Unfortunately, I think it is going to be the typical Capitol Hill hearing. I think it's going to be very similar to the one that we saw at the end of October, which is in contrast to the hearings that the House Judiciary did, where it actually did do a very in-depth investigation, actually got into the details of the facts and did, hours and hours of interviews with market participants and reviewed millions of documents. These Senate hearings have mostly been a lot of grandstanding and not as much substance as we saw on the House side.
Sally, one of the things in your notes that stuck out to me is that we're basically asking the wrong question. So we shouldn't be focused on this making fair and unbiased moderation decisions, but you're saying there actually needs to be something else that lawmakers need to be focused on. What should they be asking?
Right, they should be asking, why are we giving these companies the power to do the content moderation over the speech that reaches billions of people in the first place? So what really we should be focused on is how to deconcentrate these platforms' control over speech. That is the one point that both sides could agree upon. I mean, we're seeing the Democrats focusing on the failure to take down disinformation, and you're seeing the Republicans being angry about what's being taken down. It's going to be hard to get agreement on both sides in terms of how to reform Section 230, but I don't think reforming Section 230 really fixes the problem, which is having so much power vested in these companies. And instead, we should look, like we've always done in American history, into how to deconcentrate ownership of media. And I think that's really the way forward on this issue.
So let's say you get a breakup of a Facebook or of a Twitter. What good is that if the business model is based upon them getting us addicted on algorithms that then reinforce the echo chamber in which we live? Isn't that indeed the problem?
Well, there's multiple problems. So, we need to both deconcentrate the control over speech, so whatever their business model is doesn't impact as nearly as many people or have as much scale. But we also need to reform the business model. So it's really a both and situation, not an either or situation here. The business models are very dangerous because not only are they, spreading the misinformation, they're actually amplifying it. So if there's any bias among, Facebook and YouTube in particular, that bias is actually in favor of content that makes people react. Misinformation and disinformation is much more likely to make people react than truthful information. And so, that's the direction of the bias, and we need to regulate those models to make sure that, they're not actually boosting the lies, and also that we all can see the same speech. We have a public sphere of speech that we can respond to speech we don't like with counter speech instead of all being individually targeted with, personalized algorithmic content.
So I know you're saying that the odds are that we probably won't see any changes, at least in the short term, to Section 230. But are there any downsides if we were to see changes? Are there any downsides, do you think, just to making some of these changes to Section 230? What it would mean not only for some of these big tech giants, but for some of the smaller startups?
Yeah, I mean, there are smart people who've been looking at ways to reform Section 230. I think it does need to be changed because this is, very old law that was implemented when the internet was a completely different animal than it is now, and has allowed for kind of liability shields for all kinds of conduct that was not ever anticipated. So it does need to be reformed. I just think reforming it is not going to address the concerns that the Republicans and Democrats both have right now. And that really, anti-monopoly and also reforming the business model to get rid of the hyper-targeting are really the ways to address this issue.
We're watching people like Maria Bartiromo over at that other place. tell people leave Twitter, although she hasn't, and go to this other thing called Parler.
Yeah.
Does that solve the problem?
I wouldn't say it solves the problem, but one thing that I like about having multiple options for people are that you get rid of some of the problems that we're seeing with Facebook and YouTube, where they're actually recruiting people into the extremist groups. Their algorithms identify what messages people are susceptible to, and Facebook's own internal documents showed that they had recruited 64% of members to extremist groups with their own algorithm. So the more we can have a diversity of business models out there and different options, I think that's a good thing. And especially, I don't know what Parler, for example, Parler is the model that's been coming out. I don't know enough about their business model to know if it's better, but I do think having alternatives is a good thing in general because it starts to apply, competitive constraint to what type of business model a monopoly can use.
Sally, we have the Biden administration coming in here in just a couple of months. How do you think his approach to big tech, or do you think his approach to big tech is going to be different or drastically different than what we've seen from the Trump administration over the past 4 years?
The Trump administration has been a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. I mean, we do have the DOJ case against Google that was filed at the very end, but otherwise, we had the FTC under Trump giving Facebook tiny fines that made its stock go up when the fines were announced. We didn't have any real actual strong enforcement against big tech, despite a lot of the rhetoric that we saw. I actually think we might have an increase in enforcement. I mean, there's a lot of things that are already in the works. The FTC is expected to sue Facebook in the coming months. The state's AGs are expected to join the DOJ suit against Google. I think those things will continue. But I also think the Biden administration saw the problems in the election. I mean, you have the spokesperson for the Biden campaign tweeting out that they had been pleading with Facebook for over a year to deal with the disinformation problem. So I think they're going to be motivated to take action and reduce the control of this dangerous business model over our speech, our marketplace of ideas.